The mashed potatoes were getting cold on my plate when my sister Rachel tapped her wine glass with a butter knife. 26 relatives quieted down around my parents' crowded dining room table. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone packed in for our monthly Sunday dinner, like we'd done for 20 years. "I have some incredible news," Rachel announced, sweeping her perfectly styled hair behind one shoulder. She'd shown up in a designer blazer, looking like she was about to pitch investors instead of eat pot roast with family. "My consulting business is finally getting the expansion opportunity I've been working toward." Around the table, people nodded approvingly. My cousin Michael, who thinks he's a business expert because he sells office supplies, leaned in. "What's the play, Rach?" "I'm scaling up to corporate clients," she explained. "Warming up now. Regional restaurant chains, medical groups, professional firms. The contracts are exponentially bigger, but I need upfront capital, staff, equipment, office space." My Uncle Jim, who runs an insurance agency, set down his fork. "You secure financing yet?" And here's where Rachel's expression shifted into something I'd seen before. That particular glow of someone who believes they've outsmarted everyone else in the room. "Actually," she said, pausing for effect, "I solved the financing challenge through some creative resource allocation." Sometimes successful entrepreneurs have to think outside traditional lending structures. I kept eating my green beans, methodically chewing. Something about her tone told me to just wait. Experience had taught me that patience reveals everything eventually. My Aunt Susan, an accounting manager, looked genuinely impressed. Alternative lenders, investor partnerships. The mashed potatoes were getting cold on my plate when my sister Rachel tapped her wine glass with a butter knife. 26 relatives quieted down around my parents' crowded dining room table. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone packed in for our monthly Sunday dinner, like we'd done for 20 years. "I have some incredible news," Rachel announced, sweeping her perfectly styled hair behind one shoulder. She'd shown up in a designer blazer, looking like she was about to pitch investors instead of eat pot roast with family. "My consulting business is finally getting the expansion opportunity I've been working toward." Around the table, people nodded approvingly. My cousin Michael, who thinks he's a business expert because he sells office supplies, leaned in. "What's the play, Rach?" "I'm scaling up to corporate clients," she explained. "Warming up now. Regional restaurant chains, medical groups, professional firms. The contracts are exponentially bigger, but I need upfront capital, staff, equipment, office space." My Uncle Jim, who runs an insurance agency, set down his fork. "You secure financing yet?" And here's where Rachel's expression shifted into something I'd seen before. That particular glow of someone who believes they've outsmarted everyone else in the room. "Actually," she said, pausing for effect, "I solved the financing challenge through some creative resource allocation." Sometimes successful entrepreneurs have to think outside traditional lending structures. I kept eating my green beans, methodically chewing. Something about her tone told me to just wait. Experience had taught me that patience reveals everything eventually. My Aunt Susan, an accounting manager, looked genuinely impressed. Alternative lenders, investor partnerships. Rachel's smile widened. "Even better, I identified an underutilized asset that could serve as collateral for a substantial business loan. Sometimes the best solutions are right in front of you. You just have to recognize the opportunity." That word, underutilized asset, sent a quiet signal through my brain. Not alarm bells, not yet, but a signal. In my line of work, you learn to recognize certain phrases, certain patterns, certain moments when someone is about to admit something they really shouldn't admit in front of anyone. "What kind of asset?" my cousin Jennifer asked. She's a financial planner. She actually understands collateral requirements. Rachel's grin reached full wattage. My brother Kevin's car. It's been sitting in his driveway for months, barely getting used. So I listed it as collateral for my $85,000 business expansion loan. The table erupted, not in horror, not in concern, in applause. My father actually clapped his hands together. That's brilliant. Why let valuable assets sit idle when they could generate opportunities? My mother beamed, looking between us like we'd just won a parenting award. This is exactly the kind of family cooperation that leads to real success. Rachel's vision, Kevin's stability, perfect synergy to Rachel's expansion and Kevin's contribution, smart resource utilization, all around. Half the table joined the toast. I kept eating my dinner. See, here's what none of them knew. That 2019 Honda Accord in my driveway, it wasn't just a car. It was a registered federal asset. Every vehicle owned by a law enforcement officer with my level of security clearance gets flagged in multiple federal databases: DEA, asset tracking, Treasury monitoring networks, Homeland Security personnel protection protocols. Any attempt to use it as collateral, transfer the title, or modify ownership automatically triggers investigation procedures that cannot be stopped once initiated. Rachel had just admitted to wire fraud, collateral fraud, and unauthorized use of federal employee assets in front of 26 witnesses, most of whom had just toasted her criminal behavior. She'd also potentially compromised federal security monitoring systems designed to protect law enforcement personnel from financial exploitation or coercion. Systems that exist for very good reasons involving drug trafficking organizations, money laundering operations, and hostile actors who would love nothing more than to gain leverage over someone with access to sensitive investigations. The loan approval was incredibly smooth, Rachel continued, absolutely glowing now. Banks love lending against reliable late-model vehicles, especially when they're owned by stable government employees with excellent credit profiles. More murmurs of approval. My grandfather nodded with genuine respect. Smart entrepreneurs recognize opportunities others miss. The irony was almost too much. Stable government employee with excellent credit. Yes, that stable government employee was a federal narcotics investigator whose daily work involved tracking exactly the types of financial crimes she was describing so proudly. When do you expect first returns? Uncle Jim asked, fully invested in her success story. New office space is already secured. I'm interviewing senior consultants next week. Corporate contracts typically run 6 figures annually, so this should generate serious cash flow within 90 days. She went on about regional healthcare systems and restaurant franchise groups and profit margins. The family listened like they were attending a TED Talk. By the time dessert rolled around, Rachel had essentially presented a complete business plan, complete with market analysis and growth projections. Everyone was thoroughly convinced they'd witnessed a masterclass in creative entrepreneurship. No one realized they'd witnessed a detailed confession of federal crimes. After dinner, Rachel pulled me aside in the kitchen. She was loading the dishwasher with the efficient movements of someone who likes to appear helpful while actually managing the situation. Kevin, I know I should have mentioned the collateral arrangement before finalizing the loan paperwork, she said, using the tone people use when they're addressing a minor oversight rather than serious criminal behavior. But I knew you'd probably overthink the legal details and worry about complications that would never actually materialize. I kept drying dishes, arranging them in the cabinet. I'm sure you put considerable thought into all aspects of the financing arrangement. She looked relieved at my measured response. Exactly. This is really a win-win. The business expansion generates substantial profits. I pay off the loan ahead of schedule. Your car's value actually increases from the positive payment history. Plus, you're contributing to genuine family business success. I hung up the dish towel and turned to face her. I hope your business venture proceeds exactly according to your projections, Rachel. I meant it, actually. I genuinely hoped she'd succeed. I hoped the loan would get paid off, and none of the federal monitoring systems would flag the unauthorized collateral usage, and the whole thing would somehow resolve itself without anyone needing to know what had actually happened. That's not how federal monitoring systems work. Monday brought typical Washington, D.C. traffic. I arrived at DEA headquarters by 7:30 a.m. to review overnight intelligence reports on drug trafficking organizations operating along the I-95 corridor. My position, a senior investigative analyst in the asset forfeiture and money laundering section, requires maintaining comprehensive knowledge of financial crime patterns, how criminal organizations hide proceeds, what techniques they use, which methodologies are emerging. It's fascinating work, honestly, following the money, watching how creative people get when they're trying to conceal illegal activity. At 9:43 a.m., my secure phone rang. Special Agent Michael Torres, my immediate supervisor, 15-year veteran, worked his way up from field agent to section chief. Kevin, my office. Now, the one that means something significant developed overnight. I walked down the corridor, past secure conference rooms, where other analysts were briefing federal prosecutors. Agent Torres's office overlooks the parking garage. Through the window, I could see agents arriving for morning briefings. Close the door, he said, already activating the white noise generator. Our automated monitoring systems detected unauthorized use of your vehicle as collateral for a business loan filed Friday afternoon. He opened a classified file, spread documents across his desk. Loan applications. My car's title information, my signature, forged, but pretty convincingly. Mid-Atlantic Business Bank approved $85,000. Someone named Rachel Johnson, listed as the borrower, claiming to be your business partner, with authorization to utilize your assets for commercial purposes. I reviewed the documents. Rachel's signature, my forged signature, my car's registration and insurance information, all submitted as proof of collateral. Rachel Johnson is my sister, I said. I did not authorize her to use my vehicle or any other personal assets as collateral for any purpose. Agent Torres's expression shifted from procedural concern to professional focus. You could almost see him mentally reclassifying the case. So this is collateral fraud, unauthorized use of federal employee assets, potential compromise of security monitoring systems, mandatory FBI involvement, federal prosecution under multiple statutes. He gathered the documents. Kevin, did you have any prior knowledge of this loan application? None. I learned about it at family dinner yesterday when she announced it to 26 relatives, most of whom congratulated her on her resourcefulness and business acumen. Agent Torres leaned back. I'd worked with him for years. I'd seen him investigate all kinds of financial crimes, but even he looked slightly amazed. She announced federal crimes at a family gathering with multiple witnesses. 26 witnesses heard her admit to using my car as unauthorized collateral. Several specifically praised her for creative resource utilization and strategic asset management. He shook his head and reached for his secure phone. I'm initiating immediate coordination with FBI financial crimes units and federal prosecutors. This is collateral fraud, wire fraud, unauthorized use of federal employee assets, and potential compromise of security monitoring systems. The enhanced penalties apply automatically. At 2:15 p.m., Special Agent Lisa Chin from the FBI's White Collar Crime Unit arrived at DEA headquarters. She specialized in financial fraud cases involving federal employees, crimes targeting law enforcement personnel and their assets. Agent Johnson, she said, settling into a secure conference room. Your sister used your personal vehicle as unauthorized collateral for a business loan. Tell me everything. I provided a comprehensive account of Sunday's family dinner. Rachel's announcement, the family's enthusiastic response, her explanation of the financing strategy, the toast, the kitchen conversation afterward. Agent Chin took detailed notes. This pattern is unfortunately common in cases involving federal employee assets. Family members often assume they can use relatives' property for financial purposes without understanding the federal monitoring systems and enhanced penalties involved. She closed her notebook. We'll be executing federal search warrants at your sister's business location and residence within the next 3 hours. Given her public admission to federal crimes with multiple witnesses, this investigation will proceed under expedited protocols. At 4:47 p.m., my personal cell phone rang. Rachel's name on the screen. Kevin. Her voice was panicked. Wrong. Kevin, federal marshals just surrounded my office. Official vehicles, badges. They're saying I committed federal crimes involving unauthorized use of law enforcement assets. They have warrants for my computers, business records, everything. I was finishing my daily case reports. Through my office window, I could see agents leaving after their Monday briefings. That sounds very concerning, Rachel. What specifically are the federal agents telling you? They have search warrants for collateral fraud, wire fraud, violations of federal asset monitoring protocols. Her voice was getting shrill. They're asking about unauthorized use of federal employee property, potential security clearance violations. Kevin, what is happening? At that exact moment, 3 federal agents were indeed searching her business office. 2 FBI from white-collar crime, 1 DEA investigator from asset forfeiture, federal warrants authorizing seizure of computers, business documents, loan records, everything related to the fraudulent collateral arrangement. Rachel, I said calmly, using the same professional tone I used when coordinating with prosecutors about financial crime cases. You admitted at family dinner that you used my car as unauthorized collateral for your business loan. That constitutes federal collateral fraud, wire fraud, and unauthorized use of federal employee assets. But it's just your car. It sits in your driveway. I thought family helping family was perfectly legal. Federal law doesn't recognize family relationships as authorization for using someone else's property as loan collateral. You committed serious federal crimes using assets belonging to a federal law enforcement officer. That triggers enhanced penalties and mandatory prosecution protocols. The line went quiet, except for her rapid breathing and the distant sound of federal agents explaining search procedures in the background. Kevin, you have to stop this investigation. Tell them this was all a family misunderstanding. I cannot stop a federal investigation, Rachel. You committed federal crimes. You admitted to those crimes in front of 26 witnesses. Federal law enforcement agencies are required to prosecute collateral fraud and unauthorized asset usage, regardless of family relationships. In the background, I could hear Agent Chin's voice explaining Miranda rights and federal arrest procedures. Rachel was being offered the opportunity to cooperate, provide complete information about her criminal activity and any other individuals who might have been involved. They want to know about the loan application process, Rachel said, panic rising, the forged signatures, whether I used anyone else's assets without permission. What am I supposed to tell them? You should tell federal agents the complete truth about your criminal activity and retain qualified federal criminal defense counsel immediately. I kept my voice calm. Providing false information to federal agents will result in additional charges for obstruction of justice and false statements to federal investigators. At 6:23 p.m., Rachel was formally arrested. Charges: collateral fraud, wire fraud, unauthorized use of federal law enforcement assets, violations of federal security monitoring protocols. She was processed at the federal detention facility and held pending arraignment. Let me be clear about what these charges meant. Collateral fraud involving federal employee assets carries enhanced sentencing guidelines automatically. Wire fraud in amounts exceeding $80,000 triggers potential sentences of up to 15 years in federal prison. The security monitoring violations added additional penalties because Rachel had potentially compromised federal systems designed to protect law enforcement personnel from financial exploitation. These weren't minor charges. These weren't things that go away because someone says, "But we're family." Mid-Atlantic Business Bank, the institution that approved the loan, faced regulatory investigation for approving fraudulent collateral arrangements without adequate verification of asset ownership. Their loan officers would be required to provide detailed testimony about approval processes and documentation review procedures. The office space Rachel had leased with the fraudulent funds immediately forfeited as proceeds of criminal activity. Her corporate client contracts terminated the moment those clients learned their consultant had been arrested on federal fraud charges. Her business operations ceased entirely. All of it gone. My family's reaction followed patterns I could have predicted. Multiple relatives called expressing disappointment that I had destroyed Rachel's business opportunity over what they continued to characterize as family cooperation rather than federal criminal activity. My mother was particularly distressed. She called repeatedly to demand that I resolve this situation by speaking to my supervisors about dismissing the charges or reducing the penalties. She genuinely could not comprehend that federal collateral fraud cases don't disappear because family members request leniency. She couldn't understand that my position involved investigating financial crimes, not excusing them. "Kevin, she's your sister. You have to help her." "Mom, I can't stop a federal investigation. She committed crimes. But it was just your car. It wasn't hurting anything. The law doesn't work that way. You're choosing your job over your family." I've heard that line a lot since then. I'll probably hear it for the rest of my life. At Rachel's federal arraignment, she appeared in court wearing detention clothing, looking exhausted from her time in federal holding. Her court-appointed federal defense attorney advised her to consider pleading guilty and cooperating fully with the investigation. That was the only path to minimizing her sentence under federal guidelines. Federal prosecutors presented substantial evidence: Rachel's recorded admissions at the family dinner, testimony from 26 witnesses who heard her confess to collateral fraud, detailed financial records showing the unauthorized loan arrangement, expert testimony from DEA officials explaining federal asset monitoring systems and security protocols. The federal judge denied bail, citing the seriousness of fraud charges involving federal law enforcement assets, citing the potential for additional criminal activity if Rachel was released pending trial. She would remain in federal detention until sentencing, 8 weeks away. During the pre-sentencing investigation, federal probation officers discovered something else. Rachel had previously exaggerated her business credentials and financial qualifications on multiple loan applications, a pattern of fraud extending beyond this single crime. She'd also claimed false partnerships with several legitimate businesses to enhance her apparent credibility with lenders. The additional evidence of systematic fraud eliminated any possibility of reduced charges or lenient sentencing. Federal guidelines for crimes involving law enforcement personnel assets require enhanced penalties. That's not optional. That's the law. It exists to protect federal monitoring systems and maintain the security of sensitive government operations. Operations that involve investigating drug trafficking organizations. Operations that involve disrupting money laundering networks. Operations that involve keeping people safe from exactly the kinds of criminal enterprises Rachel's fraud had potentially compromised. 8 weeks later, Rachel stood before the federal judge for sentencing, 3.5 years in federal prison, 4 years supervised probation, restitution of $112,000, covering the fraudulent loan amount, federal investigation costs, bank regulatory penalties, and administrative expenses for enhanced security protocol reviews. The federal judge noted something during sentencing. He said Rachel's public confession of her crimes at a family gathering, witnessed by over 24 people, demonstrated complete disregard for federal law and a fundamental misunderstanding of the serious nature of collateral fraud and asset misuse. He was right. She genuinely hadn't understood. She'd thought it was clever, resourceful, strategic. She'd thought family cooperation trumped federal law. My position at DEA was unaffected by Rachel's criminal activity, though my security clearance was reviewed, standard procedure, and my asset monitoring was enhanced as a precautionary measure. Federal security officials conducted comprehensive background reinvestigations to ensure Rachel's crimes hadn't compromised any sensitive operations or intelligence. They hadn't, but they could have. That's why the system exists. The monthly family dinners were quietly discontinued after numerous relatives received federal subpoenas as material witnesses. Uncle Jim, Aunt Susan, 8 cousins, all required to provide sworn testimony about Rachel's admissions and the family's reaction to her criminal behavior. Several family members faced additional scrutiny when background investigators discovered other questionable financial arrangements, shared credit cards, co-signed loans, informal asset usage agreements that bordered on fraudulent activity. Nothing that rose to the level of federal charges, but enough to create complications. I still drive my Honda Accord. It remains registered in federal databases as a monitored asset, subject to enhanced security protocols, exactly where it belongs for someone involved in investigating financial crimes. The difference is that family gatherings are significantly smaller now, more cautious. Rachel won't be eligible for release until she serves her complete federal sentence. Several relatives maintain distance because they associate me with causing her imprisonment rather than investigating the crimes she chose to commit. My parents occasionally call requesting help with Rachel's commissary expenses and legal fees for potential appeals. I've explained that federal collateral fraud convictions carry serious long-term consequences, permanent restrictions on business licenses, professional certifications, access to commercial credit. They still don't understand that my security clearance prohibits financial assistance to family members convicted of federal crimes involving law enforcement assets. Any such assistance would jeopardize my career and potentially result in criminal charges against me. Last month, I received a letter from Rachel at the Federal Correctional Facility. She wrote that she's beginning to understand the seriousness of federal fraud charges, but she's struggling with why using family assets for business purposes resulted in federal prison rather than simple family cooperation. She asked why I never explained the federal monitoring systems and legal restrictions surrounding my personal property, especially given my work in federal law enforcement. I haven't responded. Federal employees are discouraged from maintaining correspondence with family members convicted of crimes involving federal assets. My security clearance requires disclosure of all contact with individuals who have violated federal financial crime statutes. The monthly family dinners have been replaced with occasional, smaller gatherings that I rarely attend. When I do interact with family members, and notably more careful about discussing financial arrangements, business ventures, or any suggestions involving shared resources. Rachel's business consulting career ended permanently with her federal conviction. The loan she obtained through collateral fraud is now evidence in federal databases. Documentation of systematic financial crimes targeting federal employee assets. My car remains in my driveway, registered under federal monitoring systems as the protected asset of a law enforcement officer with security clearance. It couldn't be used as collateral, transferred, or modified without extensive federal authorization and security reviews, exactly as it should be for someone with access to sensitive drug enforcement operations. Some lessons about federal law and the consequences of financial fraud can only be learned through direct experience with federal prosecution and imprisonment. Rachel is receiving comprehensive education about collateral fraud, wire fraud, and the enhanced penalties that apply when federal law enforcement assets are involved in criminal schemes. The business expansion never occurred. The fraudulent loan was seized as proceeds of criminal activity. My assets remain under enhanced federal protection, exactly where they belong for someone involved in investigating the same types of financial crimes Rachel chose to commit. If there's a lesson here, and I think there is, it's this. Federal monitoring systems exist for reasons you probably don't fully understand. Reasons involving national security, law enforcement protection, and the prevention of exactly the kind of financial exploitation that can compromise sensitive operations. When those systems flag something, the investigation doesn't stop because someone says, "But we're family." The law doesn't work that way, and 26 witnesses to a federal crime won't save you from the consequences of committing one.